Marcus Rivera made what his entire family called the most idiotic decision of his already ruined life, purchasing a completely worthless, drought-stricken farm in the forgotten backroads of Clearwater County with his last $650. What he discovered buried beneath that sun-baked, cracked earth would not only resurrect his shattered existence, but reveal a natural treasure that had been waiting in darkness for over 80 million years, transforming both a broken man and an entire rural community that had long ago given up hope. Before we dive into this incredible journey that will challenge everything you think you know about failure and second chances, drop a comment telling us what state or country you're tuning in from. I love seeing where our community spans across the globe. And if stories of impossible comebacks inspire you like they inspire me, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Because tomorrow I've got a story about a janitor's $90 million lottery win that will absolutely blow your mind. But more than that, stories matter because they prove that your current circumstances don't define your future possibilities. Now, let me paint you a picture of just how impossible this transformation really was. Picture this: a sweltering July morning in Clearwater County, Texas, one of those days where the heat starts beating down before the sun fully rises, where the asphalt seems to shimmer like water, and where even the cicadas sound exhausted. Marcus Rivera, 38 years old, with calloused hands that told the story of 20 years of hard labor, stood in the courthouse parking lot staring at his phone screen. The number glowing back at him read $654.18. That wasn't his monthly income. It wasn't his weekly budget. That was everything, his entire net worth, his complete financial existence reduced to less than what most people spend on groceries in a week. But here's what makes this story so remarkable, and why I need you to really understand the depths of where Marcus had fallen. It's just 18 months before this moment. 18 months, this same man had been living what most of us would consider the American dream. He owned Rivera Gardens. It's a thriving landscaping company that he'd built from scratch over 15 years. We're not talking about a small operation here. This was a business that employed 14 full-time workers, owned 6 commercial vehicles, and had contracts with some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Austin and San Antonio. Marcus specialized in creating these elaborate, almost artistic garden designs, water features, imported stonework, custom irrigation systems that could cost more than some people's cars. His client list read like a who's who of Texas business leaders. Corporate executives, successful attorneys, even a few minor celebrities had Rivera Gardens transform their properties. Marcus had developed a reputation for being able to visualize and create outdoor spaces that increased property values by tens of thousands of dollars. Wasn't just planting flowers and mowing lawns. He was essentially an outdoor architect, creating living art that people would drive by just to admire. The man who now had $654 to his name had once closed a single landscaping contract for $180,000. The man who was about to sleep in a borrowed pickup truck had once lived in a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Cedar Park, complete with a 2-car garage, a workshop where he designed his garden plans, and ironically, one of the most stunning backyard landscapes in Central Texas, a showcase of his own abilities that served as a living advertisement for his business. But more than the business success, more than the financial stability, Marcus had been living what seemed like a solid family life. He was married to Alina Rodriguez Rivera, his college sweetheart from UT Austin, where they'd both studied, he in agricultural business, she in elementary education. Alina taught 3rd grade at a highly rated elementary school, and together, they were raising twin daughters, Sophia and Isabella. Were 15 years old at the time everything started falling apart. Picture their life. Sophia was on the varsity soccer team and had genuine prospects for a college scholarship. Isabella was in the school's gifted and talented program, consistently making honor roll, and had dreams of becoming a veterinarian. They lived in one of those neighborhoods where kids could ride their bikes safely, where neighbors knew each other's names. Where the biggest drama was usually about homeowner association regulations or who was hosting the next block party. Marcus would leave for work each morning around 6 a.m., usually grabbing coffee with Alina before she headed to school. He'd spend his days transforming people's outdoor spaces, Coming home tired but satisfied, often with dirt under his fingernails, and stories about the projects he was working on. Evenings were spent at soccer games, helping with homework, or working in his own garden, the hobby that had become his profession, the passion that had built their comfortable middle-class life. Weekends meant family time. They'd go to Ladybird Lake, take the girls camping in the hill country, or host barbecues where Marcus would show off both his landscaping skills and his surprisingly good grilling abilities. They weren't wealthy by any stretch, but they were secure, stable, and building toward a future that seemed predictable and promising. So how does someone go from that life, from being a respected business owner, devoted husband, an involved father, to standing in a courthouse parking lot with less than $700 to his name, about to make a desperate decision that everyone would ridicule? How does the American dream turn into what felt like the American nightmare in less than 2 years? That's where this story takes a turn that might sound familiar to some of you, because it's a journey that more Americans have taken than we'd like to admit. It's the story of how quickly everything you've built can disappear, how rapidly success can transform into struggle, and how the very qualities that made you successful, pride, determination, the belief that hard work guarantees security, can sometimes contribute to your downfall. The collapse of Marcus Rivera's life wasn't caused by any single catastrophic event. It wasn't a natural disaster, a sudden illness, or a dramatic betrayal. Instead, it was the result of what economists call a perfect storm. Multiple smaller crises that compounded and amplified each other until they created a cascade of failure that became impossible to stop. It started, like many business failures do, with cash flow problems. In 2019, Marcus had landed 3 enormous contracts simultaneously at corporate headquarters in Austin that wanted a complete landscape redesign, a luxury housing development in San Antonio that needed extensive irrigation and native plant installation, a private estate in Westlake Hills that was essentially building a botanical garden on their property. These contracts represented the biggest opportunities Rivera Gardens had ever secured. Combined, they were worth over $2.8 million in revenue. Marcus saw this as his chance to take the business to the next level, to move from successful local landscaper to major regional contractor. He invested heavily in new equipment, hired additional workers, and even took out a substantial business loan to purchase specialized machinery that would allow him to handle projects of this scale and complexity. But here's where the perfect storm began to form. It's a corporate headquarters project, which represented nearly $1.2 million of that total revenue, hit a snag when the company's parent corporation was acquired by a larger firm. The new ownership decided to put all capital improvements on hold, pending a comprehensive review of expenditures. In corporate speak, that meant Marcus's contract was suspended indefinitely. Now, in a normal business environment, this would have been disappointing but manageable. Marcus had been running Rivera Gardens for 15 years. He understood that projects sometimes got delayed, contracts sometimes fell through, and successful business owners needed to be able to weather temporary setbacks. But remember, this wasn't a normal business environment. Marcus had leveraged heavily to take on these projects. He'd hired additional workers at higher wages, purchased expensive equipment with payment plans, and structured his cash flow around the assumption that he'd be receiving regular payments from all 3 contracts. When the largest contract suddenly disappeared, he found himself with ongoing expenses that far exceeded his incoming revenue. The luxury housing development contract, which should have provided the steady cash flow to keep operations running, began experiencing its own problems. The developer, it turned out, was having difficulty securing final financing for the project. Payments that were supposed to arrive every 2 weeks began stretching to monthly, then bi-monthly. Marcus would call the project manager, who would apologize profusely and assure him that payment was coming any day now, that it was just a temporary bureaucratic delay. Meanwhile, Marcus still had to meet payroll every Friday. He still had equipment payments due every month. He still had insurance premiums, fuel costs, material expenses, and all the other overhead that comes with running a legitimate above-board business. He started using credit cards to cover short-term gaps, telling himself it was just temporary, that once the payments started flowing normally again, he'd pay everything off and return to profitability. But the third contract, the private estate. Project soon revealed its own complications. The property owners, it turned out, were going through a contentious divorce. The wife wanted the landscaping project completed as originally planned. The husband wanted it stopped immediately, claiming it was an unnecessary expense during their financial proceedings. Marcus found himself caught in the middle of a legal battle, with $400,000 worth of work completed but no clear path to getting paid for it. Now, during all of this business turmoil, Marcus was trying to maintain normalcy at home. He didn't want to worry Alina and the girls with what he kept telling himself were temporary problems. Every evening he'd come home, and when Alina would ask how work was going, he'd say, "Fine, just some client delays, nothing serious." He'd help with homework, attend soccer games, and maintain the facade that everything was under control. Alina wasn't oblivious. She noticed that Marcus seemed stressed, that he was working longer hours, but the family's income seemed to be decreasing. She noticed that he'd started handling all the financial decisions himself, no longer discussing major purchases or upcoming expenses. She noticed that when bills arrived in the mail, Marcus would quickly take them to his office rather than leaving them on the kitchen counter, as he always had before. The twins noticed changes too. Their father, who had always been present and engaged, seemed distracted during family time. Sophia mentioned to her mother that Dad seemed worried all the time, and Isabella asked why he was always on his phone, even during dinner. Alina, being an intelligent woman who had been married to Marcus for 16 years, eventually confronted him directly. It was a Sunday evening in October 2019. After the girls had gone to bed, when she sat down at the kitchen table where Marcus was reviewing project contracts and asked the question that would begin the end of their marriage, "Marcus, what's really going on with the business?" The conversation that followed was the first honest discussion they'd had in months, and it revealed the extent of the financial problems Marcus had been hiding. The suspended contracts, the delayed payments, the mounting debt, the increasingly desperate juggling of expenses and credit cards. Lena learned all of it in one devastating evening. But more damaging than the financial revelations was the breach of trust. Alina felt that Marcus had been lying to her for months, making unilateral decisions about their family's financial future without including her. Marcus felt that Alina didn't understand the pressures of running a business, that he'd been trying to protect her from worrying about problems he was confident he could solve. "You should have told me," Alina said, her voice carrying a mixture of hurt and anger. "We're supposed to be partners. These decisions affect all of us." "I was handling it," Marcus replied, the defensive tone that would become increasingly common in their conversations. "I didn't want you to worry about something that was going to work itself out, but it's not working itself out, is it, Lena?" Pressed. "You just told me we're $80,000 in debt on credit cards alone. You told me you haven't received payment from 2 major contracts in over 3 months. How is that handling it?" It's conversation. Pattern Alina demanding transparency and partnership, Marcus insisting he could solve the problems himself. Repeated itself with increasing frequency and hostility throughout the fall and winter of 2019. What had once been a strong partnership began to feel like 2 people pulling in opposite directions, each convinced the other didn't understand the full scope of the situation. Meanwhile, Rivera Gardens continued its downward spiral. The equipment payments that Marcus had taken on to handle the large contracts became impossible to maintain when those contracts failed to generate expected revenue. The specialized machinery that was supposed to set his business apart from competitors became a financial albatross that drained resources without generating income. Marcus was forced to let go of workers, starting with the most recently hired and gradually working his way through employees who had been with the company for years. Each layoff was devastating. These weren't just employees, they were people Marcus had worked alongside, trained, and considered friends. Men who had families of their own, who depended on Rivera Gardens for their livelihoods, who trusted Marcus to provide stable employment. The worst was letting go of David Morales, his foreman and right-hand man who had been with the company for 8 years. David had started as a general laborer and had worked his way up to managing entire projects. He had bought a house based on the steady income from Rivera Gardens. His wife had just had their second child. "I'm sorry, David," Marcus said on a Friday afternoon in January 2020. the words feeling like broken glass in his throat. I can't make payroll next week. I've got to shut down operations until some of these contracts get resolved. David looked at him with a mixture of understanding and disappointment. I know you didn't want this to happen, Marcus. But I've got to start looking for something else. I can't wait for maybe. By March 2020, just as the COVID-19 pandemic was beginning to reshape the American economy, Rivera Gardens was essentially defunct. The corporate contract had been formally canceled. The housing development had gone bankrupt, leaving Marcus with no prospect of recovering the $200,000 in unpaid invoices. The divorce case involving the private estate had been settled, but the settlement included a clause that absolved both parties of responsibility for contractor payments, leaving Marcus with completed work and no compensation. The business that had taken 15 years to build was gone in less than 8 months. Marcus found himself not just unemployed but deeply in debt, with business loans, equipment payments, credit card balances that totaled over $180,000. The house in Cedar Park, which had been partially secured by business assets, was suddenly at risk. Alina, who had been trying to hold the family together while Marcus fought to save the business, finally reached her breaking point. The stress had affected every aspect of their family life. The twins were struggling in school, their grades dropping as the tension at home became impossible to ignore. Sophia had quit the soccer team, saying she didn't want to burden the family with travel expenses. Isabella had become withdrawn, spending most of her time in her room. I can't do this anymore, Alina said during what would be their final conversation as a married couple. It was a warm evening in April 2020. They were sitting on the back patio of the house they would soon lose, surrounded by the beautiful landscape Marcus had created during better times. The business is gone, Marcus. I've accepted that. You're gone too. You're so focused on what you've lost that you can't see what you still have. You can't see that your daughters need their father to be present, not just physically here, but emotionally available. You can't see that I need my husband to be my partner, not someone who makes all the decisions and then expects me to live with the consequences. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he was fighting for their future, that he was doing everything he could to restore their financial security. But looking at Elena's face, seeing the exhaustion and sadness, there he realized that somewhere in his determination to save his business, he had lost his family. I think, Alina continued, her voice barely above a whisper, I think we need to separate. I think I need to take the girls and stay with my parents for a while. I think you need to figure out who you are when you're not Rivera Gardens. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Alina didn't seek alimony, she couldn't, since Marcus had no income and substantial debt. She did get primary custody of Sophia and Isabella, along with the right to relocate with them to San Diego, where her parents had moved after retirement, and where her father had connections that could help her find a new teaching position. The house was sold to satisfy business debts, though the amount recovered wasn't enough to eliminate Marcus's financial obligations entirely. The remaining equipment was liquidated at pennies on the dollar. Even Marcus's personal tools accumulated. Over 2 decades of landscaping work had to be sold to generate whatever cash possible. By August 2020, Marcus Rivera found himself in a position he could never have imagined 2 years earlier. He was divorced, estranged from his daughters, who were now living across the country, unemployed in an industry that had been devastated by the pandemic, and carrying debt that would take years to resolve, even if he could find steady employment. He was staying in a room he rented week to week from a man named Carlos, who lived in a rundown duplex in East Austin. The room was barely large enough for a single bed and a small dresser.
Ow.
He shared a bathroom with 3 other tenants and had access to the kitchen for 2 hours each evening. His entire material existence fit into 2 duffel bags and a plastic storage container. The job search was humiliating for a man who had once employed others. Landscaping companies, when they were hiring at all, wanted young workers who could handle physical labor for low wages. At 38, with a bad back from 2 decades of manual work and a resume that showed business ownership rather than employee loyalty, Marcus was either overqualified or too expensive for most positions. Few interviews he did secure often ended poorly. Potential employers would ask about the gap in his employment, and Marcus would have to explain the business failure. Some were sympathetic but couldn't justify hiring someone who might leave once the economy improved. Others seemed to view the business failure as evidence of poor judgment or work ethic. Construction work was available, but it paid a fraction of what Marcus had earned as a business owner, and even those jobs were temporary. He worked for a roofing company for 6 weeks until the project ended. He did concrete work for a month until a back injury forced him to take time off, which resulted in his termination. He even tried working at a garden center, thinking his plant knowledge would be valuable, but the hourly wage barely covered his basic living expenses. The psychological toll was perhaps worse than the financial hardship. Marcus had lost not just his income and his family, but his identity. For 15 years, he had been Marcus Rivera, the landscaping guy. People knew him, respected him, sought his advice on outdoor projects. He had been a contributor to his community, an employer, a provider. Now he was just another middle-aged man struggling to find work, invisible to most people, pitied by those who remembered his former success. Old friends and business contacts seemed uncomfortable around him, as if failure might be contagious. Social interactions became awkward as people struggled to make conversation with someone whose life had taken such a dramatic turn for the worse. The relationship with his daughters became increasingly strained. Sophia and Isabella, now settled into their new life in San Diego, had made new friends and adjusted to different schools. Their weekly phone calls with Marcus became shorter and more awkward. They were teenagers dealing with their own challenges, and their father's problems seemed distant and incomprehensible. Alina remained civil, but distant. She had found a teaching position and was rebuilding her life. She didn't discourage the girls from maintaining contact with their father, but she also didn't pretend that the separation was temporary or that reconciliation was likely. By December 2020, Marcus could no longer afford even the weekly room rental. Carlos, the duplex owner, was sympathetic but needed paying tenants. Marcus found himself sleeping in his 2003 Ford F-150, the only asset he had managed to keep from his former life. But when the truck's transmission failed and repair costs exceeded what he could afford, even that refuge was lost. That's when Carlos made an offer that probably saved Marcus's life. "Look, man," he said, "I've got this old Chevy pickup that doesn't run great, but it runs. You can borrow it if you help me with some work around the duplex painting. Basic maintenance, stuff like that. It's just until you get back on your feet." So Marcus Rivera, who had once designed gardens for millionaires, found himself sleeping in a borrowed 1998 Chevrolet Silverado with a cracked windshield and a muffler that announced his presence 3 blocks away. He showered at truck stops when he could afford the fee, at gym day passes when those were cheaper, and sometimes not at all for days at a time. He ate 1 meal a day, usually from fast food dollar menus, carefully calculating whether he could afford both lunch and dinner, or if he needed to choose. He learned which gas stations had the cleanest restrooms, which parking lots were safe for overnight sleeping, and which truck stops had electrical outlets where he could charge his phone. Which brings us back to that July morning in 2021. Standing in the courthouse parking lot with $654.18 to his name, Marcus had come to Clearwater County, about an hour northeast of Austin, because he'd heard there might be construction work available on a new highway project. The job didn't pan out to many applicants, not enough positions, but while he was there, he noticed a flyer posted on a bulletin board outside the courthouse. County property auction. The header read, "Foreclosed properties and tax delinquent. Land sales." Marcus almost walked past it. What use did property listings have for someone sleeping in a borrowed truck? But something made him stop and read through the listings. Most were houses with starting bids well beyond his means, commercial properties that required serious investment, small lots suitable for development, but useless to someone with no resources. Then he saw it. Parcel for 7B, Henderson Farm Road. 240 acres, farmhouse and outbuildings. No utilities connected. Significant structural issues. Minimum bid, $600. 240 acres for $600, even in his desperate state. Marcus recognized that this was an unusual opportunity. Land in Central Texas, even marginal land, typically sold for much more than $2.50 per acre. There had to be something seriously wrong with this property for it to be priced so low. Marcus spent the next 2 days researching the property. Clearwater County Clerk's office had records showing that the land had belonged to the Henderson family for over 60 years. The last owner, James Henderson, had died 3 years earlier with no direct heirs and substantial unpaid property taxes. The county had eventually seized the property and was now selling it to recover the tax debt. The description wasn't encouraging. Farmhouse uninhabitable due to structural damage and lack of maintenance. No working well. Soil quality poor due to apparent contamination. Property has been vacant for over 5 years. But Marcus also discovered some interesting history. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Henderson farm had been moderately successful, growing cotton and raising cattle. James Henderson had been known as an innovative farmer who experimented with different crops and farming techniques. The decline. He was staying in a room he rented week to week from a man named Carlos, who lived in a rundown duplex in East Austin. The room was barely large enough for a single bed and a small dresser.
Ow.
He shared a bathroom with 3 other tenants and had access to the kitchen for 2 hours each evening. His entire material existence fit into 2 duffel bags and a plastic storage container. The job search was humiliating for a man who had once employed others. Landscaping companies, when they were hiring at all, wanted young workers who could handle physical labor for low wages. At 38, with a bad back from 2 decades of manual work and a resume that showed business ownership rather than employee loyalty, Marcus was either overqualified or too expensive for most positions. Few interviews he did secure often ended poorly. Potential employers would ask about the gap in his employment, and Marcus would have to explain the business failure. Some were sympathetic but couldn't justify hiring someone who might leave once the economy improved. Others seemed to view the business failure as evidence of poor judgment or work ethic. Construction work was available, but it paid a fraction of what Marcus had earned as a business owner, and even those jobs were temporary. He worked for a roofing company for 6 weeks until the project ended. He did concrete work for a month until a back injury forced him to take time off, which resulted in his termination. He even tried working at a garden center, thinking his plant knowledge would be valuable, but the hourly wage barely covered his basic living expenses. The psychological toll was perhaps worse than the financial hardship. Marcus had lost not just his income and his family, but his identity. For 15 years, he had been Marcus Rivera, the landscaping guy. People knew him, respected him, sought his advice on outdoor projects. He had been a contributor to his community, an employer, a provider. Now he was just another middle-aged man struggling to find work, invisible to most people, pitied by those who remembered his former success. Old friends and business contacts seemed uncomfortable around him, as if failure might be contagious. Social interactions became awkward as people struggled to make conversation with someone whose life had taken such a dramatic turn for the worse. The relationship with his daughters became increasingly strained. Sophia and Isabella, now settled into their new life in San Diego, had made new friends and adjusted to different schools. Their weekly phone calls with Marcus became shorter and more awkward. They were teenagers dealing with their own challenges, and their father's problems seemed distant and incomprehensible. Alina remained civil, but distant. She had found a teaching position and was rebuilding her life. She didn't discourage the girls from maintaining contact with their father. But she also didn't pretend that the separation was temporary or that reconciliation was likely. By December 2020, Marcus could no longer afford even the weekly room rental. Carlos, the duplex owner, was sympathetic but needed paying tenants. Marcus found himself sleeping in his 2003 Ford F-150, the only asset he had managed to keep from his former life. But when the truck— "I have enough for this," he replied. "It's 240 acres in Clearwater County. I can get it for $600. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had been dropped. $600 for 240 acres, Alina finally said. "Marcus, if land is selling for that price, there's something seriously wrong with it. This sounds like another one of your plans that seems reasonable to you, but is actually a disaster waiting to happen." Marcus understood her skepticism. From Elena's perspective, he had already proven that his judgment couldn't be trusted. The business decisions that had destroyed Rivera Gardens, the secrecy and pride that had ended their marriage, the inability to find stable employment, all of it suggested that Marcus Rivera was not someone who should be trusted with important decisions. "Maybe you're right," Marcus admitted. "Maybe this is a terrible idea that will make everything worse. But Elena, I'm already at the bottom. I can't fall any further than I've already fallen. And if I'm wrong, if this is just another mistake, then I'll be broke and homeless, which is exactly what I am right now." So that's how Marcus Rivera, the divorced dad who had lost his business, his family, and his future, found himself standing in the Clearwater County courthouse on a sweltering Friday morning in July 2021, holding bidder number 23 and preparing to spend his last $650 on what everyone would call the most worthless piece of land in 3 counties. What he didn't know, what no one in that sparsely attended auction could have imagined, was that beneath those 240 acres of sun-baked, apparently contaminated soil lay one of the most significant petroleum deposits discovered in central Texas. In over 2 decades, what he couldn't have predicted was that his desperate, ridiculed purchase would eventually make him one of the wealthiest independent oil producers in the state. But most importantly, what Marcus couldn't have foreseen was that this decision, this moment when he chose to risk everything on what looked like nothing would teach him that sometimes the difference between failure and success isn't about making the right decision, but about making any decision when you've reached the point where doing nothing is the only real mistake you can make. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, Marcus is still the broke, desperate man that everyone pities or ridicules. The oil discovery, the wealth, the vindication, all of that is still buried beneath soil that most people see as worthless. First, we need to see what happened when Marcus Rivera, with his last $650, stood up in that courthouse auction room and made the bid that would change his life forever. To truly understand the magnitude of Marcus Rivera's fall, and why his desperate decision to buy that abandoned farm would eventually shock everyone who had written him off, we need to travel back in time. We need to go back to when Marcus Rivera wasn't a cautionary tale, wasn't a man sleeping in a borrowed truck, wasn't someone people whispered about with a mixture of pity and judgment. We need to go back to when Marcus Rivera was living proof that the American dream was alive and well in central Texas. Picture this. It's March 2004. Marcus Rivera, 22 years old with calloused hands and boundless ambition, is standing in the driveway of a modest house in Pflugerville, Texas, shaking hands with Mrs. Walsh, retired teacher who has just hired him to redesign her backyard. The contract is for $3,200 more money than Marcus has ever made from a single job, but more importantly, Mrs. Walsh has told him that if he does good work, she'll recommend him to her neighbors in this upscale subdivision where landscaping is seen as an investment. It's not just an expense. Marcus drives away from that handshake in a 1995 Ford F-150 with 180,000 miles on it, pulling a small trailer that holds everything he owns in terms of professional equipment, 2 lawnmowers he bought used, a small tiller he rebuilt himself, hand tools he's accumulated over 3 years of working for other people's landscaping companies, and most importantly, a notebook filled with sketches and ideas for outdoor spaces that exist only in his imagination. This is the beginning of Rivera Gardens, though Marcus doesn't know it yet. Right now, he's just a young man with a high school diploma, 2 years of community college agricultural science courses. It's an absolute certainty that he can create something beautiful and lasting with his hands, some plants, and a vision that nobody else seems to share. But to understand how Marcus got to that handshake moment, we need to go back even further, to the foundation that made everything possible. Marcus Rivera was born in 1982 in Del Valle, a small community just southeast of Austin that was still largely rural when he was growing up. His father, Roberto Rivera, worked construction concrete work. Specifically on his mother, Maria Rivera, cleaned houses for wealthy families in Westlake Hills and Tarrytown. The Rivera family lived in a small house on 2 acres that Roberto had purchased with the dream of one day building something bigger, something better for his family. But construction work was irregular, and Maria's cleaning jobs, while steady, didn't pay enough to turn dreams into reality quickly, so the 2 Acres remained largely undeveloped except for the section where young Marcus began experimenting with plants. It started when Marcus was 8 years old. Maria had mentioned to one of her employers, a woman named Dr. Jennifer Patterson, who was a professor of botany at UT, that her son seemed fascinated by the plants in the gardens she cleaned. Dr. Patterson, perhaps moved by kindness or curiosity, gave Maria a box of basic gardening tools and some seed packets, suggesting that the boy might enjoy learning to grow things. What Dr. Patterson probably intended as a simple gift to keep a child occupied became the foundation of Marcus's entire future. That first summer, working in a small section of the family's property, 8-year-old Marcus planted tomatoes, peppers, and marigolds. But he didn't just plant them randomly even at that age. He seemed to understand that plants needed to be arranged thoughtfully, that colors and heights and growing seasons mattered, that creating something beautiful required more than just putting seeds in the ground. Roberto noticed his son's interest and began teaching him practical skills that would prove invaluable years later. How to prepare soil properly, how to build simple irrigation systems using PVC pipe and timers, how to construct raised beds that would drain properly during Texas's intense thunderstorms. Roberto approached gardening the same way he approached construction, with careful planning, quality materials, and attention to detail that would ensure the finished product would last. By the time Marcus was 12, the Rivera family's 2 acres had been transformed into something that neighbors would drive by just to admire. There were vegetable gardens that produced food for the family year-round. There were flower beds arranged in patterns that provided continuous color through Texas's long growing season. There were fruit trees that Roberto and Marcus had planted and carefully trained to provide shade for the house while producing peaches, plums, and figs. But most impressively, there was a water feature that Marcus had designed and Roberto had helped him build a small pond with a waterfall that used recycled water and attracted birds and butterflies from throughout the area. The pond had cost less than $200 in materials, but it looked like something that might be found at a much more expensive property. Word of the Rivera family's beautiful property began to spread through the community. Neighbors would stop by too. Ask Roberto and Marcus for advice about their own landscaping projects. What started as friendly conversations began to turn into paid consultations, and then into small jobs helping Mrs. Martinez design a vegetable garden, installing a drip irrigation. "I have enough for this," he replied. "It's 240 acres in Clearwater County. I can get it for $600. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had been dropped. $600 for 240 acres, Alina finally said. "Marcus, if land is selling for that price, there's something seriously wrong with it. This sounds like another one of your plans that seems reasonable to you, but is actually a disaster waiting to happen." Marcus understood her skepticism. From Elena's perspective, he had already proven that his judgment couldn't be trusted. The business decisions that had destroyed Rivera Gardens, the secrecy and pride that had ended their marriage, the inability to find stable employment, all of it suggested that Marcus Rivera was not someone who should be trusted with important decisions. "Maybe you're right," Marcus admitted. "Maybe this is a terrible idea that will make everything worse. But Alina, I'm already at the bottom. I can't fall any further than I've already fallen. And if I'm wrong, if this is just another mistake, then I'll be broke and homeless, which is exactly what I am right now." So that's how Marcus Rivera, the divorced dad who had lost his business, his family, and his future, found himself standing in the Clearwater County courthouse on a sweltering Friday morning in July 2021, holding bidder number 23 and preparing to spend his last $650 on what everyone would call the most worthless piece of land in 3 counties. What he didn't know, what no one in that sparsely attended auction could have imagined, was that beneath those 240 acres of sun-baked, apparently contaminated soil lay one of the most significant petroleum deposits discovered in central Texas. In over 2 decades, what he couldn't have predicted was that his desperate, ridiculed purchase would eventually make him one of the wealthiest independent oil producers in the state. But most importantly, what Marcus couldn't have foreseen was that this decision, this moment when he chose to risk everything on what looked like nothing, would teach him that sometimes the difference between failure and success isn't about making the right decision, but about making any decision when you've reached the point where doing nothing is the only real mistake you can make. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, Marcus is still the broke, desperate man that everyone pities or ridicules. The oil discovery, the wealth, the vindication, all of that is still buried beneath. What attracted Elena to Marcus wasn't his academic achievements. He was a solid B student whose real interests clearly lay outside the classroom, but his passion and vision for his work. While other teenage boys were focused on cars, sports, or video games, Marcus talked about creating outdoor spaces that would make people happy, about starting his own business, about building something lasting and meaningful. You know what I love about you? Elena told him during one of their early conversations as they sat under the pergola he'd built in his family's backyard. Most people our age don't know what they want to do with their lives. But you've known since you were 8 years old, and you've been working toward it every day since then. Elena became Marcus's first real partner in thinking about Rivera Gardens as an actual business rather than just a teenage hobby. She helped him create a basic business plan for a high school economics project. She designed flyers and advertisements when he started actively seeking customers beyond their immediate neighborhood. Most importantly, she believed in his vision at a time when most adults still saw him as just a kid who was good with plants. After graduating from high school, Marcus faced a choice that would define his approach to business for the next 15 years. He could follow Elena to UT Austin and pursue a 4-year degree, probably in agricultural business or horticulture. Or he could continue building his landscaping operation while taking classes part-time at Austin Community College, learning specific skills that would directly benefit his work. Marcus chose the practical path. While Elena studied education theory and child development, Marcus took courses in soil science, plant pathology, irrigation design, and small business management. While Elena lived in dorms and experienced traditional college life, Marcus lived at home, worked during the day, and attended classes in the evenings. This decision could have driven them apart. Elena was expanding her worldview and meeting people with different backgrounds and ambitions, while Marcus remained focused on the same goals he'd had since childhood, but instead their different paths seemed to complement each other. Elena brought new ideas and perspectives to Marcus's business planning, while Marcus provided Elena with a sense of stability and purpose that her academic pursuits sometimes lacked. By 2003, when Elena graduated with her education degree and began her student teaching, Marcus had transformed his teenage landscaping hobby into a legitimate small business. Rivera Gardens had a business license, liability insurance, 3 reliable clients who provided steady work, and a reputation in the Del Valle and Southeast Austin communities as the young man who could make any outdoor space beautiful and functional. But Marcus knew that if he wanted to build something truly significant, he needed to expand beyond his comfortable base of neighbors and family friends. He needed to start working with clients who viewed landscaping as an investment rather than an expense, who were willing to pay for design and artistry rather than just basic maintenance. That's what led to the handshake with Mrs. Catherine Walsh in March 2004. Marcus's first attempt to work in an upscale neighborhood where his competition wouldn't be other young men with pickup trucks, but established landscaping companies with teams of workers and years of experience. Mrs. Walsh had contacted Marcus based on a recommendation from Dr. Patterson, the UT botany professor who had given him his first gardening tools. 16 years earlier, Dr. Patterson had kept in touch with the Rivera family over the years, occasionally visiting to see how Marcus's skills were developing. When her colleague, Mrs. Walsh, mentioned needing landscaping work, Dr. Patterson had suggested she give the young man a chance. "I'll be honest with you," Mrs. Walsh had told Marcus during their initial meeting. "I've gotten estimates from 3 other companies. They all want to charge me between $8,000 and $12,000 for what I'm trying to accomplish. Your bid is less than half of that. Either you don't understand what I'm asking for, or you're not charging enough for your work." Marcus had spent 2 hours walking through Mrs. Walsh's backyard, listening to her describe what she wanted: a space where she could entertain her book club, grow herbs for cooking, and create a memorial garden for her late husband. The other companies had proposed elaborate solutions involving extensive hardscaping, expensive plants, and irrigation systems that seemed designed more to maximize their profits than to meet Mrs. Walsh's actual needs. "Mrs. Walsh," Marcus had replied, "those other companies are charging you for a lot of things you don't actually need. You've got good soil, decent drainage, and enough space to create everything you want without moving tons of dirt or installing complicated systems. What you need is someone who understands plants and design, not someone who wants to sell you the most expensive solution possible." Marcus's proposal was elegant in its simplicity. He would create 3 distinct areas in Mrs. Walsh's backyard. Intimate seating area surrounded by fragrant plants, a practical herb garden located conveniently near the kitchen, and a quiet memorial space featuring her husband's favorite flowers and a simple stone bench that Marcus would build himself. The total cost was $3,200, including plants, materials, and labor. But Marcus had also included something that the other companies hadn't offered: a detailed drawing showing exactly what the finished space would look like, complete with plant names, mature sizes, and blooming schedules that would ensure year-round interest. "This is exactly what I wanted," Mrs. Walsh had said, studying Marcus's hand-drawn design. "But I have to ask her, you sure you can deliver all of this for this price? I don't want to hire you and then discover halfway through the project that costs are going to double." Marcus had looked her directly in the eyes and made the promise that would become the foundation of Rivera Gardens' reputation. "Mrs. Walsh, I will deliver everything on this drawing for the price I've quoted on the timeline I've promised, and if you're not completely satisfied with the work, I won't ask you to pay for it." The Walsh project took Marcus 3 weeks to complete, working mostly alone with occasional help from his father on the heavier construction tasks. But the result exceeded even Mrs. Walsh's expectations. The seating area felt like a secret garden, private and intimate despite being in a suburban backyard. The herb garden was both beautiful and practical, with raised beds that would make maintenance easy as Mrs. Walsh aged. The memorial space provided a peaceful retreat where she could remember her husband while being surrounded by life and growth. But most importantly, Marcus had delivered exactly what he had promised, on time and on budget, with a level of attention to detail that surprised even him. Every plant was positioned for optimal growth and visual impact. Every stone in the walkways was level and properly secured. Every irrigation line was hidden and functioning perfectly. When Mrs. Walsh's book club met for the first time in the newly landscaped backyard, the response was immediate and overwhelming. "Catherine, this is absolutely gorgeous," one member commented. "Who did this work for you?" another asked. "Could I get his contact information? My backyard is a disaster, and I've been looking for someone who understands design." Within a month of completing the Walsh project, Marcus had received calls from 4 other homeowners in the same neighborhood. Each call represented a potential project worth between $2,000 and $5,000 more, work than Marcus had ever handled simultaneously, and an opportunity to establish Rivera Gardens as a legitimate competitor to the established landscaping companies in the area. By the summer of 2004, Rakutz faced his first real business challenge. He had more work than he could handle alone, but not enough revenue to hire full-time employees. The solution came from an unexpected source: his father, Roberto, who had been watching his son's business grow with a mixture of pride and practical concern. Marcus, Roberto said one evening as they reviewed the estimates Marcus had prepared for his new clients, "We're going to kill yourself trying to do all this work alone, and you're going to disappoint customers if you can't finish projects. On time, you need help, but I know you can't afford to hire anyone yet." Roberto's proposal was both generous and shrewd. He would work for Rivera Gardens during his off hours from construction work, accepting payment only when the company could afford it, in exchange for a small ownership stake in the business. "I've been working for other people's companies my whole life," he explained. "Maybe it's time I worked for my own family's company." The partnership between Marcus and Roberto transformed Rivera Gardens from a one-man operation into a professional landscaping company. Roberto brought decades of construction experience, knowledge of building codes and permit requirements, and relationships with suppliers who could provide materials at contractor prices. Marcus contributed design skills, plant knowledge, and the customer relationships that were driving the company's growth. More importantly, working together allowed them to take on larger, more complex projects that would have been impossible for either of them alone. When Mrs. Patricia Zimmerman, a successful real estate agent, contacted Rivera Gardens about redesigning the landscaping for her $800,000 home, Marcus and Roberto were able to propose a comprehensive solution that included both sophisticated planting design and substantial hardscaping work. The Zimmerman project, completed in the fall of 2004, represented a turning point for Rivera Gardens. The contract was worth $18,000 more than Marcus had earned in total during his first 3 years of business. But beyond the financial significance, the project established Rivera Gardens' its reputation for handling upscale residential work that required both artistic vision and technical expertise. Mrs. Zimmerman's property presented unique challenges that tested every skill Marcus and Roberto had developed. The house was situated on a slope that required careful grading to prevent erosion while creating usable outdoor spaces. The client wanted a swimming pool area that felt private despite being visible from several neighboring properties, and she had requested a vegetable garden that would be both productive and attractive enough to complement the home's elegant architecture. Marcus's design solution demonstrated the sophisticated thinking that would eventually make him one of Central Texas's most sought-after landscape designers. He created a series of terrace levels that transformed the problematic slope into a series of distinct outdoor rooms. The pool area was surrounded by carefully selected plants that provided privacy without blocking winter sunlight. The vegetable garden was designed as a formal parterre, with geometric beds and decorative edging that made growing food look like an artistic statement. But the technical execution of the design required Roberto's construction expertise. Terracing required retaining walls that had to be engineered for stability and drainage. The irrigation system needed to accommodate different watering requirements for various planted areas while remaining invisible to maintain clean aesthetic. The hardscaping walkways, patios, and steps had to be built to standards that would remain stable and attractive for decades. The completed Zimmerman project became Rivera Gardens' most effective marketing tool. Mrs. Zimmerman hosted a garden party to show off her new outdoor spaces, inviting friends, colleagues, and neighbors who represented exactly the kind of clientele Marcus hoped to attract. The response was immediate and overwhelming. "I've never seen anything like this," commented Dr. Michael Stevens, a successful physician who lived in the same neighborhood. "This doesn't look like typical Texas landscaping. It looks like something you'd see in a high-end magazine." Another guest, Jennifer Morrison, who owned several commercial properties, asked, "Would you be interested in bidding on some commercial work? I have an office complex that needs a complete landscape redesign." Within 2 months of completing the Zimmerman project, Rivera Gardens had received inquiries about 8 new projects. With a total potential value of over $100,000, Marcus and Roberto found themselves in the enviable position of being able to choose which projects to accept based on their interest in the work and their assessment of the clients. Rather than simply taking any job that paid the bills, in May 2005, Lena graduated from UT Austin with her education degree and immediately found a position teaching 3rd grade at Elm Creek Elementary in the rapidly growing Cedar Park School District. Her starting salary was $38,000 per year steady. Predictable income that provided financial stability, while Marcus continued to grow Rivera Gardens. But Elena's contribution to the business extended far beyond financial security. Her education training had taught her about communication, organization, project management skills that proved invaluable as Rivera Gardens began handling multiple simultaneous projects with increasingly demanding clients. Elena created systems for tracking project timelines, managing supplier relationships, and maintaining customer communications that transformed Rivera Gardens from an informal operation into a professional business. She designed contracts that protected both the company and its clients, established billing procedures that ensured steady cash flow, and created customer service protocols that consistently exceeded client expectations. Most importantly, Elena believed completely in Marcus's vision for the company. She understood that Rivera Gardens wasn't just a landscaping business. It was an opportunity to create something beautiful and lasting, while building financial security for their future family. Her confidence in Marcus's abilities gave him the courage to pursue larger projects and more ambitious goals than he might have attempted alone. In December 2005, Marcus proposed to Alina in the memorial garden he had created for Mrs Walsh, the project that had launched Rivera Gardens' expansion into upscale residential work. The setting was symbolic of everything they had built together, a beautiful space that existed because of Marcus's vision and skills, but which had been made possible by Alina's support and partnership. "I want to build something with you," Marcus said as he offered Alina the engagement ring he had saved for months to purchase. "Not just a business, not just a marriage, but a life that's about creating beautiful things and making people happy while building security for our family." Alina's acceptance came with a condition that revealed her practical wisdom. "I'll marry you," it's Marcus Rivera, "but only if you promise me that we'll make decisions together." Oh. Rivera Gardens belongs to both of us now, and so does everything that comes with it, the successes and the failures, the easy times and the hard times. Their wedding, in June 2006, was held in the backyard of Marcus's family home, the same space where 8-year-old Marcus had first learned to garden, where teenage Marcus had developed his design skills, and where Rivera Gardens had been born. The setting was transformed for the occasion with elaborate floral arrangements, elegant lighting, and carefully designed spaces for dining and dancing that demonstrated everything Marcus had learned about creating beauty with plants and artistry. But the wedding also represented a practical milestone. Alina officially joined Rivera Gardens as a partner, bringing her organizational skills and financial management abilities to a business that was rapidly outgrowing its informal origins. By 2007, Rivera Gardens employed 6 full-time workers and had established relationships with high-end residential clients throughout Central Texas. The company's reputation was built on Marcus's design abilities and Roberto's construction expertise, but it was sustained by Alina's customer service excellence and business management skills. The typical Rivera Gardens project now ranged from $15,000 to $50,000, and the company maintained a waiting list of potential clients who were willing to wait months for the opportunity to work with Marcus and his team. The business had grown far beyond its origins as a young man's landscaping hobby. It had become a respected company that was changing how people thought about outdoor spaces in Central Texas. Marcus had developed a distinctive design philosophy that emphasized sustainability, beauty, and functionality. Rivera Gardens projects featured native and adapted plants that thrived in Texas conditions while providing year-round interest. Hardscaping was designed to last for decades while requiring minimal maintenance. Irrigation systems used water efficiently, while keeping plants healthy through the region's challenging climate extremes. But most importantly, Marcus had maintained his original commitment to delivering exactly what he promised, on time and on budget, while exceeding client expectations. Rivera Gardens had never had an unsatisfied customer, never missed a project deadline, and never increased costs after a contract was signed. In March 2008, Alina discovered she was pregnant not with one child, but with twins. The news was both thrilling and terrifying for Marcus and Alina. The Zimmerman project, completed in the fall of 2004, represented a turning point for Rivera Gardens. The contract was worth $18,000 more than Marcus had earned in total during his first 3 years of business. But beyond the financial significance, the project established Rivera Gardens. Its reputation for handling upscale residential work that required both artistic vision and technical expertise. Mrs. Zimmerman's property presented unique challenges that tested every skill Marcus and Roberto had developed. The house was situated on a slope that required careful grading to prevent erosion while creating usable outdoor spaces. The client wanted a swimming pool area that felt private despite being visible from several neighboring properties, and she had requested a vegetable garden that would be both productive and attractive enough to complement the home's elegant architecture. Marcus's design solution demonstrated the sophisticated thinking that would eventually make him one of Central Texas's most sought-after landscape designers. He created a series of terrace levels that transformed the problematic slope into a series of distinct outdoor rooms, The pool area was surrounded by carefully selected plants that provided privacy without blocking winter sunlight. The vegetable garden was designed as a formal parterre, with geometric beds and decorative edging that made growing food look like an artistic statement. But the technical execution of the design required Roberto's construction expertise. Terracing required retaining walls that had to be engineered for stability and drainage. The irrigation system needed to accommodate different watering requirements for various planted. But more than professional recognition, Marcus had achieved the personal goals that had motivated him since childhood. He owned his own successful business that allowed him to create beauty while earning excellent income. He was married to a woman who was both his life partner and business partner. He was the father of two healthy, happy daughters who would grow up with opportunities and security that his own parents had worked their entire lives to provide. Most importantly, Marcus had proven that his vision was correct, that there was a substantial market for landscape design that emphasized artistry and sustainability over quick installation and maximum profit. Rivera Gardens had demonstrated that customers would pay premium prices for work that exceeded their expectations and lasted for decades with minimal maintenance. The Rivera family's daily routine in 2009 represented everything Marcus had dreamed of achieving when he first shook hands with Mrs. Walsh 5 years earlier. Marcus would wake each morning in his comfortable home, have coffee with Alina while discussing the day's priorities, and then drive to job sites where he supervised projects that challenged his creativity while generating substantial profits. Alina taught 3rd grade at a school she loved, worked with children who adored her, and earned recognition as one of the district's most effective teachers. Her summers off allowed her to spend intensive time with Sophia and Isabella, while also handling Rivera Gardens' administrative responsibilities during the company's busiest season. The twins were thriving in their daycare program, showing early signs of the intelligence and creativity that both parents hoped they had inherited. Sophia seemed drawn to artistic activities, drawing, painting, and arranging flowers that Marcus brought home from job sites. Isabella showed more interest in how things worked, taking apart toys to see their mechanisms, asking detailed questions about construction projects, displaying the same practical curiosity that had characterized Marcus's childhood. Evenings were spent as a family helping with homework, playing in the backyard garden that Marcus had designed specifically for the girls' enjoyment, or attending community events where Marcus and Alina were recognized as successful young professionals who had built something meaningful in their hometown area. Weekends meant family adventures throughout Central Texas, camping in state parks, visiting farmers markets, exploring small towns, or hosting barbecues where Marcus could show off both his landscaping skills and his surprisingly good grilling abilities. They were building the kind of memories that would sustain family bonds for decades, creating traditions that Sophia and Isabella would hopefully continue with their own children someday. By 2010, the Rivera family had achieved genuine financial security. Marcus and Alina owned their home outright, having paid off the mortgage years ahead of schedule using Rivera Gardens' profits. They had established college savings accounts for Sophia and Isabella that were on track to cover full university educations at quality institutions. They had built substantial emergency savings that could sustain the family for over a year if Rivera Gardens faced unexpected challenges. Most importantly, Rivera Gardens itself had become a valuable asset. The company's reputation, client relationships, proven systems meant that it could continue generating substantial income even if Marcus chose to step back from day-to-day operations. Several competitors had approached Marcus about potential acquisitions, suggesting that Rivera Gardens could be sold for well over $1 million if he ever decided to pursue different opportunities. But Marcus had no interest in selling. Rivera Gardens represented more than just financial value. It was the realization of his childhood dreams, the foundation of his family's security, and his opportunity to continue creating beauty while building something lasting. The business had grown beyond his most optimistic projections while maintaining the core values that had guided its development from the beginning: exceptional design, superior customer service, and absolute integrity. In all business dealings, the high point of Marcus Rivera's success came in April 2011, when Rivera Gardens was selected to design and install the landscaping for the new headquarters of TechFlow Solutions, a rapidly growing software company that was building a $15 million facility in northwest Austin. The contract was worth $280,000, the largest single project in Rivera Gardens. History and represented recognition that Marcus had achieved elite status among Central Texas landscape designers. The TechFlow project challenged every skill Marcus had developed over 15 years of professional work. The design needed to reflect the company's innovative culture while providing functional outdoor spaces for employees. The installation required coordination with multiple other contractors working simultaneously on the facility. The timeline was aggressive, requiring Rivera Gardens to complete the work before the building's grand opening ceremony. But Marcus approached the project with the same philosophy that had guided every Rivera Gardens contract: deliver exactly what was promised, on time and on budget, while exceeding client expectations. The design featured sustainable plantings that would thrive with minimal maintenance, innovative hardscaping that provided multiple functional areas, and an irrigation system that used reclaimed water to minimize environmental impact. The completed project was stunning, a corporate landscape that looked more like a high-end resort than a typical office building. TechFlow's employees began using the outdoor spaces for meetings, meals, and relaxation, exactly as Marcus had intended. The grand opening ceremony was featured in local business publications, with Rivera Gardens receiving prominent credit for creating an environment that enhanced both the building's functionality and its aesthetic appeal. The success of the TechFlow project led to recognition that confirmed Marcus's status as one of Central Texas's premier landscape designers. Austin Business Journal named him one of the region's 40 under 40 business leaders. The Texas Association of Landscape Contractors awarded Rivera Gardens its highest honor for design excellence. Marcus was invited to speak at industry conferences and to serve on the advisory board of Austin Community College's landscape design program. But more meaningful than professional recognition was the respect Marcus had earned in his community. He was known as someone who had built success through hard work, integrity, and exceptional skill. Other business owners sought his advice about managing growth and maintaining quality standards. Young people interested in landscaping careers asked to work for Rivera Gardens, viewing it as the best training ground in the region. Marcus had become the kind of person others looked up to, a successful entrepreneur who had achieved financial prosperity while maintaining strong family values and community connections. He was living proof that the American dream was attainable for those willing to work hard, make smart decisions, and never compromise their core principles. As 2012 began, Marcus Rivera's life represented everything he had dreamed of achieving. When he first started Rivera Gardens 8 years earlier, he owned a thriving business that generated excellent income, allowing him to practice his passion for creating beautiful, outdoor spaces. He was married to Alina, who was not only his life partner, but also his most trusted business advisor and the mother of his beloved daughters. Sophia and Isabella, now 3 years old, were healthy, happy children who brought joy and energy to every day. They lived in a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood with excellent schools. They had financial security that allowed them to make decisions based on what was best for their family rather than what was most economical. Marcus had achieved respect in his community, recognition in his industry, and most importantly, the satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful through honest work and ethical business practices. Rivera Gardens had grown from a young man's ambitious dream into a respected company that employed 14 people, served hundreds of satisfied clients, and contributed to the beauty and sustainability of Central Texas communities. Looking ahead, the future seemed full of promise. Sophia and Isabella would grow up with opportunities their parents had never imagined. Rivera Gardens could continue expanding, perhaps into new markets or service areas. Marcus and Alina could look forward to decades of marriage, partnership, and shared success in both their personal and professional lives. But as we know from part 1 of this story, this peak of success and happiness was about to be shattered by a series of events that would destroy everything. Marcus had built and reduced him to sleeping in a borrowed pickup truck with his last $650. The business that had seemed so solid, the marriage that had appeared so strong, the future that had looked so secure, all of it would disappear with shocking speed, leaving Marcus with nothing but the desperate hope that 240 acres of worthless farmland might somehow provide a path back to a life worth living. The contrast between the Marcus Rivera of 2012, successful business owner, devoted husband, proud father, and the Marcus Rivera of 2021, divorced, homeless, ridiculed for buying junk, land represents one of the most dramatic falls from prosperity that anyone could imagine. But sometimes, as we're about to discover, the most devastating losses position us for the most remarkable recoveries. Sometimes what looks like complete failure is actually the foundation for unprecedented success. And sometimes, the desperate decisions we make when we have nothing left to lose turn out to be the smartest choices we've ever made. Next, we need to see exactly how Marcus Rivera's perfect life turned into a perfect disaster, and why that disaster would ultimately make his eventual triumph. Even more shocking to everyone who thought they knew his story, now comes the part of Marcus Rivera's story that's painful to tell, but essential to understand. Because what happened next proves that no matter how successful you become, no matter how carefully you plan, no matter how hard you work to build security, life can change everything in ways you never imagined possible. And sometimes, the very success that makes you feel invincible becomes the foundation for your most devastating failure. It's January 2019. Marcus Rivera is standing in his office at Rivera Gardens, looking at 3 contracts spread across his desk that represent the biggest opportunity in his company's 15-year history. Combined, these projects are worth $3.2 million in revenue, more money than Rivera Gardens has ever handled in a single year. More than Marcus earned in his first 5 years of business combined. The first contract is with Meridian Corporate Plaza, a new business complex being built in Northwest Austin. They want Rivera Gardens to design and install complete landscaping for their 15-acre headquarters campus, including elaborate water features, specialized lighting systems, and sustainable plantings that will serve as a showcase for environmentally conscious businesses. The contract value, $1.4 million, to be paid in monthly installments over 18 months. The second opportunity comes from Westfield Luxury Homes, a developer creating an upscale residential community in Cedar Park. They need landscaping for common areas, model homes, and individual lots as houses are completed and sold. It's the kind of ongoing relationship that could provide steady revenue for years. Initial contract value, $900,000, with potential for additional work worth millions more. The third project is the most prestigious Rivera Gardens has ever been offered: the complete landscape redesign for the Ashford Estate, a $12 million private residence in Westlake Hills owned by technology entrepreneur David Ashford and his wife Margaret. The property encompasses 25 acres of rolling hills overlooking Lake Austin, and the clients want to create something that will be featured in national luxury home magazines. Contract value, $850,000, with a completion timeline of 2 years. Stares at these contracts with a mixture of excitement and apprehension that he hasn't felt since those early days of building the business. This is his chance to move Rivera Gardens from successful regional company to major player in the Texas landscape industry. These projects will establish relationships with the kind of clients who can provide ongoing work for decades. Most importantly, the combined revenue will generate enough profit to secure his family's financial future permanently. But there's a problem, and Marcus knows it even as he tries to convince himself it's manageable. Taking on $3.2 million worth of work simultaneously will require Rivera Gardens to scale up dramatically and quickly. The company will need to hire additional workers, purchase specialized equipment, and manage cash flow carefully to cover expenses. Before client payments arrive, Lena Marcus calls to his wife, who's working at her computer in the adjacent office, handling the administrative side of Rivera Gardens while also preparing lesson plans for her teaching position. "Come look at this. Tell me what you think." Alina joins Marcus at his desk, and as she reviews the contracts, her expression shows the same mixture of opportunity and concern that Marcus is feeling. As Rivera Gardens' financial manager, she understands better than anyone what these projects will require in terms of upfront investment and operational complexity. "Marcus, this is incredible," she says, her voice reflecting genuine excitement. "These are exactly the kinds of clients we've been hoping to attract. But honey, are we ready for this much growth this quickly? Our biggest single project so far has been $280,000. You're talking about taking on work that's more than 10 times that scale." This conversation, taking place in their comfortable office on a cold January morning, represents the moment when Marcus Rivera's life begins its trajectory toward the courthouse parking lot where we found him in. Part 1. The decision he makes in the next few minutes will determine whether Rivera Gardens becomes the major landscape design firm he's always dreamed of building, or whether everything he's worked for will disappear in less than 2 years. Marcus looks at Alina, seeing the practical concerns in her eyes, but also recognizing the trust and support that has made their partnership successful for over a decade. "We can handle this," he says, his voice carrying the confidence that has guided every major decision in Rivera Gardens' growth. "We've been building toward opportunities like this for 15 years. We have the skills, we have the reputation, and we have the systems in place to deliver exceptional work. But do we have the resources?" Elena asks, pulling out her laptop. "To review Rivera Gardens' current financial position, taking on this much work means we'll need to hire at least 8 new employees immediately. We'll need to purchase equipment that costs more than we've spent in the past 3 years combined. And we'll be carrying expenses for months before we start receiving substantial payments from clients." Elena's analysis shows that Rivera Gardens is financially healthy, with $180,000 in cash reserves and access to a $300,000 business line of credit that the company has never needed to use. But the upfront costs for these 3 projects, payroll, equipment, materials, insurance, will require investments of nearly $500,000. Before the first major client payments arrive, it's aggressive, Marcus admits, but that's how businesses grow. We've been conservative for 15 years, building slowly and carefully. But these opportunities don't come along often. If we turn them down, these clients will find other companies to work with, and we'll never get another chance with projects at this level. After 3 days of analysis, discussion, and careful consideration of alternatives, Marcus and Alina make the decision that will change their lives forever. Rivera Gardens will accept all 3 contracts and commit to delivering exceptional work that exceeds client expectations, just as the company has done with every project in its history. "We're going to do this," Marcus announces to Roberto and the core Rivera Gardens team during a meeting on Friday morning.
"Oh.
"We're going to prove that our company can handle major projects while maintaining the quality standards that have built our reputation. This is our chance to establish Rivera Gardens as one of the premier landscape design firms in Texas." The team's response is overwhelmingly positive. These are skilled professionals who take pride in their work and have been hoping for opportunities to tackle more challenging and prestigious projects. David Morales, Marcus's foreman and most trusted employee, speaks for the group. "We've been ready for this for years, Marcus. Rivera Gardens does the best work in Central Texas, and it's time more people knew that." The first few months of 2019 feel like validation of Marcus's decision to pursue aggressive growth. Rivera Gardens hires 10 new employees, including experienced landscape designers, irrigation specialists, and equipment operators who bring valuable skills and industry connections. The company purchases specialized machinery that allows them to handle large-scale grading, sophisticated irrigation installations, and complex hardscaping projects. Most importantly, the early phases of all 3 major projects proceed smoothly. The Meridian Corporate Plaza work begins with site preparation and infrastructure installation that demonstrates Rivera Gardens' ability to coordinate with other contractors while maintaining their quality standards. The Westfield Luxury Homes relationship starts with successful completion of model home, landscapes that generate enthusiasm from potential buyers and praise from the development's marketing team. The Ashford Estate project proves most challenging, but also most rewarding as Marcus collaborates directly with David and Margaret Ashford to create outdoor spaces that reflect their sophisticated tastes while showcasing Rivera Gardens' design capabilities. The initial phases: master planning, site analysis, and infrastructure preparationist establish Marcus as someone who can work effectively with wealthy demanding clients who expect perfection. Alina manages the administrative complexities of coordinating 3 major projects simultaneously. Developing systems for tracking progress, managing supplier relationships, ensuring that client communications remain personal and responsive despite the company's rapid growth. Her organizational skills prove essential as Rivera Gardens navigates the operational challenges of scaling up so dramatically. But by June 2019, subtle signs begin to suggest that Marcus's optimistic projections might have been overly aggressive. The first concern comes from Meridian Corporate Plaza, where the general contractor managing the overall construction. Project begins experiencing delays due to permit issues and weather-related setbacks. Rivera Gardens landscaping work, which was scheduled to begin in phases throughout the spring and summer, gets pushed back repeatedly as other aspects of the construction fall behind schedule. It's just temporary, Marcus tells Alina when she raises concerns about the impact of delays on their cash flow projections. 8. These kinds of projects always have scheduling challenges. The important thing is that we're ready to move quickly when they give us the go-ahead. But the delays at Meridian create a cascade of problems that Marcus doesn't fully recognize at the time. Rivera Gardens has hired additional workers and purchased equipment specifically for that project, creating ongoing expenses without corresponding revenue. The company's cash reserves, which had seemed adequate for normal project timelines, begin depleting more rapidly than anticipated. The second warning sign comes from Westfield Luxury Homes, where home sales have been slower than projected due to changing market conditions and increased competition from other developments. The developer's initial optimism about rapid lot sales and corresponding landscape installations proves overly optimistic, meaning that Rivera Gardens' work will be spread over a longer timeline with smaller monthly payments than originally projected. The third and most devastating blow comes in August 2019. David Ashford calls Marcus with news that will ultimately destroy everything Rivera Gardens has built. TechFlow Solutions, the software company that has been David's primary source of wealth, has been acquired by a larger corporation in a deal that initially appears to be great news for the Ashford family. Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up about some changes in our situation, David says during what Marcus assumes will be a routine project update call. TechFlow has been acquired by GlobalSoft Corporation for $400 million. It's an incredible opportunity for our company and our employees. Marcus congratulates David, assuming that increased wealth will mean even more ambitious plans for the estate landscaping project. But David's next words begin to reveal the complexity of the situation. However, the acquisition process is going to be more complicated than we initially understood. GlobalSoft is requiring a complete review of all TechFlow operations before the deal can be finalized. As part of that process, Margaret and I need to put all major personal expenditures on hold until we understand the full implications of the corporate transition. The conversation that follows is polite but devastating. The Ashford Estate Project, which represents $850,000 in contracted revenue and on which Rivera Gardens has already invested heavily in design work and site preparation, will be suspended indefinitely. David assures Marcus that the project will resume once the acquisition is completed, but he can't provide any timeline for when that might happen. I understand this creates challenges for your planning, David acknowledges, but I'm confident. This is just a temporary delay. The acquisition will actually put us in a much stronger financial position to complete the project exactly as we've envisioned it. Marcus hangs up from the call with David Ashford, feeling like he's been hit by a truck. The Ashford Project presents more than just revenues. The showcase project that was supposed to establish Rivera Gardens' reputation with ultra-high net worth clients. More immediately, the suspension means that $850,000 in projected revenue has suddenly disappeared from the company's cash flow projections. When Marcus explains the situation to Alina, her response reflects the financial reality that Marcus is still trying to process. Honey, we've already spent over $200,000 on the Ashford project design work, site preparation, specialty plants that were ordered specifically for their property. If that project is suspended indefinitely, we're not just losing future revenue, we're absorbing costs that we may never recover. Elena's analysis reveals the full scope of the problem. Rivera Gardens has scaled up its operations based on the assumption that revenue from all three major projects would flow according to the original timelines. The company now employs 23 people, has monthly operating expenses of over $180,000, and has committed to equipment payments and supplier contracts that total nearly $400,000 over the next 18 months. With the Ashford project suspended, the Meridian project delayed, and the Westfield work proceeding more slowly than projected, Rivera Gardens faces a cash flow crisis that threatens the company's survival. The situation is manageable if the delays are truly temporary, but if they extend for several months, the company will be unable to meet its financial obligations. Marcus's response to the cash flow crisis reflects both his optimism and his pride qualities that have driven Rivera Gardens' success, but will now contribute to its downfall, rather than scaling back operations to match reduced revenue. He decides to use the company's line of credit and personal resources to maintain full staffing and continue normal operations while waiting for the delayed projects to resume. This is temporary, Marcus tells Alina as they review options for managing the financial shortfall. All three clients are still committed to their projects. The delays are due to circumstances beyond anyone's control, not because they're dissatisfied with our work or having second thoughts about the scope of their projects. By September 2019, Rivera Gardens has drawn down its entire $300,000 line of credit and is using credit cards to cover short-term expenses. Marcus has also taken a $50,000 loan against the equity in their Cedar Park home, telling Alina that it's a short-term bridge loan that will be repaid as soon as client payments begin flowing normally again. The psychological pressure of the financial situation begins affecting Marcus in ways that he doesn't fully recognize at the time. He becomes increasingly focused on managing cash flow and client relationships, spending less time on the design work that has always been his passion and strength. He starts working longer hours while becoming less productive, as much of his energy goes towards solving immediate problems rather than building long-term value. October 2019 brings news that transforms Rivera Gardens' difficult situation into a genuine crisis. Westfield Luxury Homes, the residential development company that represents Rivera Gardens' second-largest contract, announces that they're suspending all new construction due to financing difficulties with their primary lender. The phone call delivering this news comes from Jennifer Martinez, Westfield's project manager, who has worked closely with Marcus on the landscape designs for the development's common areas and model homes. Marcus, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but Westfield is going to need to pause all landscaping work for the next several months while we resolve some issues with our construction financing. Jennifer explains that Westfield's lender has become concerned about the pace of home sales and has required the developer to slow construction until more lots are sold and more revenue is generated. The landscaping work, which is typically one of the final phases of development, will be among the first activities to be postponed. Alina manages the administrative complexities of coordinating three major projects simultaneously: developing systems for tracking progress, managing supplier relationships, ensuring that client communications remain personal and responsive despite the company's rapid growth. Her organizational skills prove essential as Rivera Gardens navigates the operational challenges of scaling up so dramatically. But by June 2019, subtle signs begin to suggest that Marcus's optimistic projections might have been overly aggressive. The first concern comes from Meridian Corporate Plaza, where the general contractor managing the overall construction project begins experiencing delays due to permit issues and weather-related setbacks. Rivera Gardens' landscaping work, which was scheduled to begin in phases throughout the spring and summer, gets pushed back repeatedly as other aspects of the construction fall behind schedule. It's just temporary, Marcus tells Alina when she raises concerns about the impact of delays on their cash flow projections. 8. These kinds of projects always have scheduling challenges. The important thing is that we're ready to move quickly when they give us the go-ahead. But the delays at Meridian create a cascade of problems that Marcus doesn't fully recognize at the time. Rivera Gardens has hired additional workers and purchased equipment specifically for that project, creating ongoing expenses without corresponding revenue. Alina, I know this is scary, Marcus says, as they sit at their kitchen table, reviewing loan documents that will put their home at risk. If Rivera Gardens can't generate sufficient revenue, but Rivera Gardens is more than just a business to me. It's our livelihood. It's 23 people's jobs, and it's everything we've worked for since we got married. I can't just give up when we're facing temporary problems. Alina signs the loan documents, but her expression shows the doubt and fear that Marcus is trying to suppress. Marcus, promise me that if this doesn't work, if the projects don't resume, or if we can't find enough new work, promise me that you'll make the hard decisions before we lose everything. Marcus makes that promise, but his definition of losing everything proves to be very different from Elena's. For Marcus, losing everything means admitting that Rivera Gardens has failed, laying off employees who depend on him, and accepting that his 15-year dream of building a major landscape design firm has ended in bankruptcy and humiliation. For Alina, losing everything means putting their family's financial security, their daughter's future, and their marriage at risk for a business that may no longer be viable. The difference in their perspectives creates the first serious strain in their relationship since the early days of building Rivera Gardens. By December 2019, Marcus has personally guaranteed over $400,000 in business loans, used credit cards to cover another $150,000 in operational expenses, and borrowed against every asset the family owns. Rivera Gardens continues operating at nearly full capacity, with Marcus telling his employees that the current challenges are temporary setbacks that will be resolved once the delayed projects resume. But privately, Marcus is beginning to understand that the situation is much more serious than he initially believed. The Ashford project remains suspended with no clear timeline for resumption. The Westfield work has been postponed until at least mid-2020, and the Meridian project has been scaled back significantly due to budget constraints discovered during the construction delays. The stress of managing Rivera Gardens' financial crisis begins affecting every aspect of Marcus's life. He starts experiencing insomnia, lying awake at night, calculating and recalculating cash flow projections, trying to find solutions that will allow the company to survive until revenue resumes. His appetite disappears, and he loses 15 pounds. Over 2 months without making any conscious effort to diet. More concerning, Marcus begins withdrawing from his family emotionally. Sophia and Isabella, now 11 years old, notice that their father seems distracted and worried even during family time. Alina observes that Marcus has stopped talking about future plans, stopped discussing family activities, and started treating every conversation about finances as a potential argument. "You're not the same person you were 6 months ago," Alina tells Marcus during one of their increasingly frequent discussions about the business situation. "Used to come home excited about the projects you were working on, eager to tell me about design challenges and client interactions. Now you come home stressed about money, worried about payroll, and so focused on problems that you can't see anything positive." Marcus's response reveals how the crisis has changed his perspective on everything. Alina, "We're facing the biggest challenge Rivera Gardens has ever confronted. I can't pretend everything is fine when 23 people are depending on me to keep their jobs, when we've borrowed against our house to keep the business operating, when everything we've built over 15 years is at risk." Just as Marcus begins to see signs that the delayed projects might resume in early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic arrives and transforms every assumption about business recovery. The lockdowns and economic uncertainty that begin in March 2020 don't just delay Rivera Gardens' major projects, they threaten to cancel them entirely. David Ashford calls in April 2020 to explain that GlobalSoft has decided to postpone the TechFlow acquisition indefinitely due to market volatility and uncertainty about the software industry's post-pandemic prospects. The Ashford Estate project, which had been suspended temporarily, is now canceled permanently. The $850,000 contract that Marcus had been counting on to stabilize Rivera Gardens' finances disappears completely. Westfield Luxury Homes faces even more severe challenges as residential construction comes to a near standstill and potential home buyers postpone major purchases due to economic uncertainty. The development company formally cancels its contract with Rivera Gardens. offering to pay only for work already completed, a fraction of the projected revenue that Marcus had used to justify the company's expansion. The Meridian Corporate Plaza project survives but is scaled back dramatically as the corporate client reduces costs and... Alina, I know this is scary, Marcus says, as they sit at their kitchen table, reviewing loan documents that will put their home at risk. If Rivera Gardens can't generate sufficient revenue, but Rivera Gardens is more than just a business to me. It's our livelihood. It's 23 people's jobs, and it's everything we've worked for since we got married. I can't just give up when we're facing temporary problems. Alina signs the loan documents, but her expression shows the doubt and fear that Marcus is trying to suppress. Marcus, promise me that if this doesn't work, if the projects don't resume, or if we can't find enough new work, promise me that you'll make the hard decisions before we lose everything. Marcus makes that promise, but his definition of losing everything proves to be very different from Elena's. For Marcus, losing everything means admitting that Rivera Gardens has failed, laying off employees who depend on him, and accepting that his 15-year dream of building a major landscape design firm has ended in bankruptcy and humiliation. For Elena, losing everything means putting their family's financial security, their daughter's future, and their marriage at risk for a business that may no longer be viable. The difference in their perspectives creates the first serious strain in their relationship since the early days of building Rivera Gardens. By December 2019, Marcus has personally guaranteed over $400,000 in business loans, used credit cards to cover another $150,000 in operational expenses, and borrowed against every asset the family owns. Rivera Gardens continues operating at nearly full capacity, with Marcus telling his employees that the current challenges are temporary setbacks that will be resolved once the delayed projects resume. But privately, Marcus is beginning to understand that the situation is much more serious than he initially believed. The Ashford project remains suspended with no clear timeline for resumption. The Westfield work has been postponed until at least mid-2020, and the Meridian project has been scaled back significantly due to budget constraints discovered during the construction delays. The stress of managing Rivera Gardens' financial crisis begins affecting every aspect of Marcus's life. He starts experiencing insomnia, lying awake at night, calculating and recalculating cash flow projections, trying to find solutions that will allow the company to survive until revenue resumes. His appetite disappears, and he loses 15 pounds. Over 2 months without making any conscious effort to diet. More concerning, Marcus begins withdrawing from his family emotionally. Sophia and Isabella, now 11 years old, notice that their father seems distracted and worried even during family time. Alina observes that Marcus has stopped talking about future plans, stopped discussing family activities, and started treating every conversation about finances as a potential argument. "You're not the same person you were 6 months ago," Alina tells Marcus during one of their increasingly frequent discussions about the business situation. "Used to come home excited about the projects you were working on, eager to tell me about design challenges and client interactions. Now you come home stressed about money, worried about payroll, and so focused on problems that you can't see anything positive." Marcus's response reveals how the crisis has changed his perspective on everything. Alina, we're facing the biggest challenge Rivera Gardens has ever confronted. I can't pretend everything is fine when 23 people are depending on me to keep their jobs, when we've borrowed against our house to keep the business operating, when everything we've built over 15 years is at risk. Just as Marcus begins to see signs that the delayed projects might resume in early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic arrives and transforms every assumption about business recovery. The lockdowns and economic uncertainty that begin in March 2020 don't just delay Rivera Gardens' major projects, they threaten to cancel them entirely. David Ashford calls in April 2020 to explain that GlobalSoft has decided to postpone the TechFlow acquisition indefinitely due to market volatility and uncertainty about the software industry's post-pandemic prospects. The Ashford Estate project, which had been suspended temporarily, is now canceled permanently. Marcus spends the next month in a frantic attempt to find solutions that will save both Rivera Gardens and his marriage. He pursues every possible avenue, contacting former clients about new projects, applying for government assistance programs, for businesses affected by COVID-19, even exploring partnerships with competitors who might be interested in Rivera Gardens' client relationships and reputation. But the fundamental mathematics of the situation haven't changed. Rivera Gardens owes more money than it can realistically generate in revenue, even under the most optimistic projections. The personal guarantees that Marcus signed require payments that exceed his family's total income from Elena's teaching salary and the company's reduced operations. By August 2020, it becomes clear that Elena's 30-day deadline will not result in a miraculous recovery. Rivera Gardens is effectively finished as a significant business. The remaining equipment must be sold to generate cash for debt payments. The office space must be abandoned. The company that took 15 years to build must be dissolved to prevent its debts from completely destroying the Rivera family's future. Elena's response to Marcus's failure to develop a viable recovery plan is swift and decisive. In September 2020, she moves with Sophia and Isabella to San Diego, where her parents have offered to help support them, while Elena looks for a new teaching position and the family rebuilds their stability. "I still love you, Marcus," Elena says, during their final conversation as a married couple, "but I can't watch you destroy yourself trying to save something that's already gone. And I won't let your inability to accept reality destroy our daughter's futures, too." The divorce that follows is swift and uncontested. Elena doesn't seek alimony, Marcus has no income to garnish, but she does receive primary custody of Sophia and Isabella, along with the right to relocate to California, where she can provide them with stability that Marcus can no longer offer. The house in Cedar Park is sold to satisfy business debts, though the proceeds aren't sufficient to eliminate all of Rivera Gardens' obligations. Marcus finds himself personally responsible for over $200,000 in remaining debt, with no business, no income, and no clear path forward. By December 2020, Marcus Rivera has lost everything that defined his identity and provided meaning to his life. Rivera Gardens, the business he built from nothing and grew into a respected company, is gone. His marriage to Elena, the partnership that sustained him through 15 years of building success, is over. His relationship with Sophia and Isabella, the daughters who represented his hopes for the future, is reduced to awkward phone calls and the painful knowledge that they're building new lives without him. Most devastatingly, Marcus has lost his sense of himself. For 20 years, he had been Marcus Rivera, the landscaping guy, someone known in his community, respected in his industry, proud of his achievements, and confident in his abilities. Now he's just another middle-aged man who failed at business, whose marriage couldn't survive the pressure, who serves as a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration. The progression from successful business owner to homeless divorcee, sleeping in a borrowed truck, represents one of the most complete personal and professional collapses imaginable. But as we'll see in the remaining parts of this story, sometimes losing everything is the necessary prerequisite for finding something far more valuable than what was lost. Which brings us back to that courthouse parking lot in Clearwater County, where Marcus Rivera stares at his phone showing at $654.18 and considers spending it all on 240 acres of land that everyone will ridicule him for buying. The successful businessman of 2019 has become the desperate man of 2021. But the same determination that drove him to build Rivera Gardens will soon drive him to make the decision that shocks everyone who thought his story was over. The crisis that destroyed everything Marcus had built was about to become the foundation for something far greater than he had ever imagined possible. But first, he had to reach the point where he truly had nothing left to lose, which is exactly where we find him as he prepares to walk into that courthouse and make the bid that will change his life forever. Next, we'll see what happens when a man with nothing left to lose decides to risk everything on what everyone else sees as nothing, and why that moment of absolute desperation becomes the first step toward the most shocking comeback anyone could imagine. We've reached the moment that changes everything, the courthouse auction that will either be Marcus Rivera's final humiliation or the beginning of the most shocking comeback in recent Texas history. Standing in that parking lot with $654.18 to his name, Marcus represents everything our society fears about middle-aged failure: divorced, bankrupt, homeless, reduced to sleeping in a borrowed truck, while his successful ex-wife builds a new life with their daughters 1,200 miles away. But what Marcus doesn't know, what nobody in that sparsely attended courthouse auction could possibly imagine, is that he's about to make the purchase that will transform him from a cautionary tale into living proof that sometimes our lowest point is exactly where our greatest opportunity has been waiting. Friday morning, July 16, 2021, the Clearwater County Courthouse auction room contains maybe 30 people. Most of them local real estate investors, scrap dealers, or neighbors, curious about properties in their area. The air conditioning struggles against the brutal Texas heat, and the auctioneer's voice echoes off concrete walls as he works through a list of foreclosed homes, abandoned lots, and tax-delinquent properties that nobody really wants. Sits in the back row, bidder number 23, pinned to his worn flannel shirt, holding the cashier's check for $650 that represents literally everything he has left in the world. Around him, experienced bidders flip through property descriptions with the casual confidence of people who know what they're doing. Marcus feels like an imposter, which, in many ways, he is. Next up, we have parcel for 7B on Henderson Farm Road. The auctioneer announces, his tone already apologetic. 240 acres, includes farmhouse and outbuildings. Property has been vacant for over 5 years. Significant structural issues, no utilities connected, soil contamination issues. Minimum bid, $600. The room falls silent. Even the casual conversations stop as people look around to see if anyone is seriously interested in what's clearly the auction's least desirable property. Marcus feels his heart pounding as he realizes this is his moment. The decision that will either provide him with basic shelter or consume the last money he has for what everyone clearly considers worthless land. "Do I have $600? The auctioneer asks, scanning the room with little expectation. Marcus raises his card, his voice cracking slightly as he calls out, $600. Several people turn to look at him, and Marcus catches a few expressions that range from puzzlement to pity. One older man shakes his head, mutters something to his companion about city folks who don't know what they're getting into. "I have $600, the auctioneer confirms, sounding surprised. "Do I hear $700? The silence stretches for what feels like minutes. Marcus sits frozen, simultaneously hoping someone will outbid him, saving him from this potentially disastrous decision. Praying that no one will take away his last chance at having a roof over his head. Going once at $600, the auctioneer calls. It's going twice at $600. He pauses, looking around the room one final time. Sold to bidder number 23 for $600. Just like that. Marcus Rivera becomes the owner of 240 acres of worthless Texas farmland. As he walks to the front of the room to complete the paperwork, he can hear whispered conversations behind him. Wonder what he thinks he's going to do with that place. Poor guy probably doesn't know what he just bought, so that land hasn't grown anything but weeds for 20 years. An hour later, Marcus drives down Henderson Farm Road in his borrowed Chevrolet pickup. Following the GPS directions to his new property, the dirt road is barely maintained, with potholes that make the truck's worn suspension groan with each impact. When he finally reaches the property marker, a rusted mailbox leaning at a 45-degree angle, Marcus gets his first real look at what he's purchased. The farmhouse sits about 200 yards from the road, and it's worse than the auction photos suggested. The roof sags in several places, windows are broken or boarded up, and the front porch is partially collapsed. Weeds and scrub brush have grown up around the foundation, making the house look like it's being slowly consumed by the Texas landscape. But it's the land itself that truly shows why nobody else was interested in bidding, as far as Marcus can see. The soil is cracked and barren, with patches of strange discoloration that look almost oily in the afternoon sun. Nothing grows here except the most stubborn weeds, and even those look sickly and stunted. What have I done? Marcus asks himself aloud, sitting in the truck with the engine running to keep the air conditioning working. I just spent my last money on land that can't grow anything, a house that's falling down, and 240 acres of nothing in the middle of nowhere. For a moment, the magnitude of his mistake threatens to overwhelm him completely. He could drive back to Austin, try to find someone willing to buy the property for whatever he can get, and use any proceeds to survive a few more weeks while looking for work. But looking around at the desolate landscape, Marcus realizes that nobody would want to buy this land for any price. He's probably the only person foolish enough to see value where none exists. That evening, as the sun sets over his new property, Marcus makes a decision that will prove to be the most important of his life. Instead of sleeping in the truck, as he has for months, he'll spend the night inside the farmhouse, despite its condition. It's not about comfort. The house has no electricity, no running water, and no air conditioning. It's about claiming ownership, about refusing to give up before he's even tried to make something work. Using a flashlight he found in the truck, Marcus explores the interior of the house. The floorboards creak ominously, and every room smells of dust, decay, and something else he can't quite identify, a petroleum-like odor that seems strongest near the kitchen area. In what was once the kitchen, Marcus discovers a trapdoor in the floor, secured with a rusted padlock that breaks easily when he hits it with a hammer from his small toolkit. The door opens to reveal wooden steps descending into what appears to be a root cellar, common feature in older Texas farmhouses. Used for storing vegetables and canned goods before modern refrigeration, Marcus climbs down carefully, his flashlight beam revealing stone walls and a packed earth floor. But as he sweeps the light around the cellar, he notices something unusual about the floor in the center of the room. Unlike the hard-packed earth everywhere else, there's a roughly circular area about 8 feet in diameter where the ground appears darker and slightly damp. Curious, despite his exhaustion, Marcus kneels and touches the strange soil. It feels oily between his fingers, and the petroleum smell that he'd noticed upstairs is much stronger down here. As someone who had worked construction before starting his landscaping business, Marcus has been around enough industrial sites to recognize the scent immediately. "No way," he whispers to himself, digging his fingers deeper into the earth. Soil becomes increasingly saturated the deeper he goes, till his fingers are coated with a black, viscous substance that can only be crude oil. Marcus sits back on his heels, heart pounding as the implications begin to sink in. Could there actually be oil beneath this property? Could the soil contamination that made the land unsuitable for farming actually be evidence of petroleum deposits? Could the reason nobody wanted this property be exactly what makes it incredibly valuable? He spends the next hour exploring the cellar more thoroughly, finding additional areas where oil has seeped through the floor. Using his phone's flashlight, he also examines the property outside, discovering several locations where the soil has the same dark, oily appearance he found in the cellar. Marcus barely sleeps that first night, his mind racing with possibilities and doubts in equal measure. Could he really have stumbled onto oil deposits worth millions? Or is he letting desperation create fantasies about what's probably just minor soil contamination from old farm equipment? The next morning, using the courthouse's public Wi-Fi, Marcus begins researching everything he can find about oil deposits in Central Texas. What he discovers is both encouraging and concerning. While there's no record of commercial oil production, in Clearwater County, neighboring counties have produced oil for decades. The geological formations that created those deposits extend throughout the region. More intriguingly, Marcus finds a 1953 newspaper article about James Henderson, the farm's previous owner, who had contacted several oil companies about potential drilling on his property. According to the article, Henderson believed there was oil beneath his land based on natural seepage he'd observed. But low oil prices and the property's remote location made exploration uneconomical at the time. Henderson was right, Marcus realizes reading the old newspaper article on his phone. He knew there was oil here 70 years ago, but nobody would listen to him. Over the next week, living in the farmhouse with no utilities and minimal supplies, Marcus tries to find a petroleum geologist who can assess the property professionally. Most companies he contacts aren't interested in evaluating a small, remote property owned by someone with no apparent financial resources. Finally, through a series of phone calls and internet searches, Marcus connects with Dr. Sarah Chen, an independent geological consultant based in Houston, who specializes in evaluating unconventional oil prospects. Dr. Chen agrees to visit the property, though she warns Marcus that her initial consultation fee is $2,500, money he doesn't have. Dr. Chen, I know this sounds crazy, Marcus explains during their phone conversation, but I spent my last $650 on this property because I was desperate for a place to live. I think I accidentally bought land that sits on top of a major oil deposit, but I have no money to pay for professional evaluation. Dr. Chen's response surprises him. Mr. Rivera, I've been doing this for 25 years. Some of the biggest discoveries I've seen have come from people who stumbled onto something. For a moment, the magnitude of his mistake threatens to overwhelm him completely. He could drive back to Austin, try to find someone willing to buy the property for whatever he can get, and use any proceeds to survive a few more weeks while looking for work. But looking around at the desolate landscape, Marcus realizes that nobody would want to buy this land for any price. He's probably the only person foolish enough to see value where none exists. That evening, as the sun sets over his new property, Marcus makes a decision that will prove to be the most important of his life. Instead of sleeping in the truck, as he has for months, he'll spend the night inside the farmhouse, despite its condition. It's not about comfort. The house has no electricity, no running water, and no air conditioning. It's about claiming ownership, about refusing to give up before he's even tried to make something work. Using a flashlight he found in the truck, Marcus explores the interior of the house. The floorboards creak ominously, and every room smells of dust, decay, and something else he can't quite identify, a petroleum-like odor that seems strongest near the kitchen area. In what was once the kitchen, Marcus discovers a trapdoor in the floor, secured with a rusted padlock that breaks easily when he hits it with a hammer from his small toolkit. The door opens to reveal wooden steps descending into what appears to be a root cellar, common feature in older Texas farmhouses. Used for storing vegetables and canned goods before modern refrigeration, Marcus climbs down carefully, his flashlight beam revealing stone walls and a packed earth floor. But as he sweeps the light around the cellar, he notices something unusual about the floor in the center of the room. Unlike the hard-packed earth everywhere else, there's a roughly circular area about 8 feet in diameter where the ground appears darker and slightly damp. Curious, despite his exhaustion, Marcus kneels and touches the strange soil. It feels oily between his fingers, and the petroleum smell that he'd noticed upstairs is much stronger down here. As someone who had worked construction before starting his landscaping business, Marcus has been around enough industrial sites to recognize the scent immediately. No way, he whispers to himself, digging his fingers deeper into the earth. Soil becomes increasingly saturated the deeper he goes, till his fingers are coated with a black, viscous substance that can only be crude oil. Marcus sits back on his heels, heart pounding as the implications begin to sink in. Could there actually be oil beneath this property? Could the soil contamination that made the land unsuitable for farming actually be evidence of petroleum deposits? Could the reason nobody wanted this property be exactly what makes it incredibly valuable? He spends the next hour exploring the cellar more thoroughly, finding additional areas where oil has seeped through the floor. Using his phone's flashlight, he also examines the property outside, discovering several locations where the soil has the same dark, oily appearance he found in the cellar. Marcus barely sleeps that first night, his mind racing with possibilities and doubts in equal measure. Could he really have stumbled onto oil deposits worth millions? Or is he letting desperation create fantasies about what's probably just minor soil contamination from old farm equipment? The next morning, using the courthouse's public Wi-Fi, Marcus begins researching everything he can find about oil deposits in Central Texas. What he discovers is both encouraging and concerning. While there's no record of commercial oil production, in Clearwater County, neighboring counties have produced oil for decades. The geological formations that created those deposits extend throughout the region. More intriguingly, Marcus finds a 1953 newspaper article about James Henderson. I'm telling you, she replies, that you need to be very careful about who you trust and what you do next. If these preliminary results are confirmed by comprehensive testing, you'll own one of the most significant oil discoveries in Texas in the past decade. The months that follow Marcus's discovery blur together in a whirlwind of geological surveys, legal consultations, and negotiations with oil companies who suddenly view him very differently than they had when he was a broke divorcee sleeping in a truck. Dr. Chen's comprehensive assessment confirms her preliminary findings. The Henderson property contains approximately 12 million barrels of recoverable oil reserves. Conservative estimates place the property's value at over $500 million, while optimistic projections exceed $800 million. Marcus, working with an energy attorney recommended by Dr. Chen, structures a development deal that allows him to maintain majority ownership while partnering with an experienced oil company for extraction and marketing. The deal provides Marcus with $50 million in upfront payments, plus ongoing royalties that will generate millions in annual income for decades. But the true magnitude of Marcus's transformation becomes clear 6 months later, when the first production wells come online and begin generating $200,000 per day in gross revenue. The man who had counted pennies for fast food meals now controls oil production that generates more money in a single day than most people earn in 4 years. Financial success, however, represents only part of Marcus's remarkable comeback. The oil discovery also provides him with the resources and confidence to rebuild the personal relationships that his business failure had destroyed. His first priority is reconnecting with Sophia and Isabella, now 17 years old and preparing for college. Using his newfound wealth, Marcus establishes education trusts that will cover their university expenses and provide financial security for their entire lives. More importantly, he begins making regular trips to San Diego, gradually rebuilding the father-daughter relationship that had been damaged by years of crisis and separation. "Dad, I have to admit something," Sophia tells him during one of his visits. "When you bought that farm, Mom, and I thought you had completely lost your mind. We were embarrassed that you'd made such a desperate decision." "Now?" Marcus asks. "Now, I think you're the smartest person I know," Isabella chimes in. "You found something that nobody else could see, and you were brave enough to risk everything on it." Marcus's relationship with Alina proves more complex. While she's genuinely happy about his success and grateful for the financial security he's provided for their daughters, the years of crisis and separation can't be easily erased. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Marcus," Alina tells him during one of their conversations about co-parenting logistics. "But I need you to understand that your success doesn't change what happened between us. The oil discovery is wonderful, but it doesn't solve the problems that ended our marriage." Marcus accepts Elena's perspective, quietly hoping that time and his demonstrated commitment to rebuilding their family stability might eventually create opportunities for reconciliation. For now, he focuses on being the best father and co-parent he can be, using his resources to support his daughter's dreams while respecting Elena's boundaries. Perhaps most meaningfully, Marcus uses his success to create positive change in Clearwater County, the rural community that inadvertently provided him with his second chance. He establishes the Henderson Foundation. It's named after the farm's previous owner, who first recognized the property's potential but never lived to see it realized. The foundation funds scholarships for local students, supports small business development, and invests in infrastructure improvements that benefit the entire community. Marcus also ensures that his oil production operations provide employment for local residents and contribute significantly to the county's tax base. "I want people to understand that this discovery isn't just about one person getting wealthy," Marcus explains during a community meeting about the foundation's activities. "This is about creating opportunities for everyone in this area, about proving that rural communities can thrive in the modern economy." 2 years after his desperate courthouse bid, Marcus Rivera stands on the porch of the Henderson farmhouse, now completely renovated but preserved as a reminder of where his journey began. The property around him has been transformed into a modern oil production facility, with wells, processing equipment, and access roads that make it barely recognizable as the abandoned farm he purchased with his last $650. But Marcus has also preserved a section of the original land in its natural state, including the root cellar where he first discovered the oil seepage that changed his life. It serves as a museum and a reminder that sometimes the most valuable discoveries are hidden beneath the most unpromising surfaces. On this particular morning, Marcus is preparing for a visit from a documentary crew that wants to tell his story. As part of a series about unlikely American success stories, as he reviews his notes for the interview, Marcus reflects on the journey that brought him from homelessness to wealth, from failure to vindication, from desperation to hope. The most important thing people need to understand, Marcus will tell the documentary crew, is that this story isn't really about oil or money. It's about what becomes possible when you have nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Marcus's transformation from divorced failure to oil millionaire represents more than just an individual success story. It demonstrates that sometimes our lowest points position us perfectly for our highest achievements. The desperate decisions can lead to discoveries that change everything, and that what looks like worthless to everyone else might be exactly what we need to rebuild our lives. The man who was ridiculed for buying junk farmland with his last few dollars had actually made the smartest investment decision in recent Texas history. The property that nobody else wanted contained treasures that had been waiting beneath the surface for decades, hidden from everyone except someone desperate enough to look for possibilities where others saw only problems. Today, Marcus Rivera's net worth exceeds $400 million. And Rivera Energy, the company he built around his oil discovery, employs over 200 people across Texas. But when people ask him about the secret to his success, Marcus always returns to that moment in the courthouse when he raised his bidder card and committed his last $650 to a purchase that everyone thought was foolish. I learned that rock bottom isn't where dreams go to die, Marcus reflects. Sometimes it's exactly where they're reborn. Sometimes losing everything is the prerequisite for finding something far more valuable than what you lost. Story has become legendary in Central Texas, inspiring other entrepreneurs and serving as proof that American opportunity still exists for those brave enough to pursue it. But more than inspiring others, Marcus's journey demonstrates timeless truths about resilience, vision, and the courage to act when action seems impossible. The divorced dad who was ridiculed for buying worthless farmland had actually made the discovery that would shock everyone who had written him off. The man who seemed to be a cautionary tale about middle-aged failure became instead a testament to the possibility of remarkable comeback, proving that sometimes the difference between disaster and triumph is simply refusing to give up when giving up seems like the only logical choice. And buried beneath that sun-baked Texas soil, waiting for someone desperate enough to take a chance on the impossible, was not just oil worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but proof that sometimes our greatest opportunities are hidden in the places where everyone else has stopped looking. The $200 million oil discovery didn't just change Marcus Rivera's bank account, it changed his understanding of what's possible. When you're willing to risk everything on what others consider nothing, and that, perhaps, is the most valuable discovery of all. From sleeping in a borrowed truck to owning one of Texas's most productive oil fields, Marcus Rivera's journey proves that sometimes the most worthless investment becomes the most valuable discovery. Sometimes the people who are mocked for their desperate decisions are exactly the ones who find the treasures that everyone else missed. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey from rock bottom to remarkable success. If Marcus Rivera's story inspired you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell tomorrow. We've got another amazing comeback story about a single mother who turned a $50 yard sale purchase into $1 million antique discovery. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And let us know in the comments, what's the biggest risk you've ever taken that paid off? Right. We love hearing your stories too.